Thank you so much for joining us today for Envision Utah's 2021 Common Good Awards. My name is Teresa Foxley, and I am one of the vice chairs of Envision Utah, an organization that I love. We hold these awards every year to honor the people and organizations who are working to make Utah a better place. This event also serves as a fantastic opportunity to bring members of the community together to talk about important issues that will affect the future of our state. If you're not familiar with Envision Utah, that's what we're all about. We're all about bringing people together to look forward and plan for a future that keeps Utah an amazing place to live and call home for generations to come. We focus on big, ambitious topics here, like air quality, education, transportation, water, you name it. And we bring together businesses, government, community leaders, and Utahns to participate in a collaborative process that ensures we all have a say in the way our communities are growing. On top of our awards, we're excited to focus today's event on one such topic, climate change. In a little bit, we'll hear from Seth Arens with the Western Water Assessment, who will be giving us a brief presentation on climate change in Utah. Then, of course, our keynote will be Representative John Curtis of Utah's 3rd Congressional District and the chairman, founder, I believe as well, of the Conservative Climate Caucus. He sat down with Envision Utah's chair, Doug Wright, to have a conversation about climate stewardship and clean air solutions in Utah. Before that conversation, though, we have the centerpiece of this event. Two very impressive organizations, WCF Insurance and Utah Refugee Coalition. Those organizations have both absolutely gone above and beyond during the last couple of years with COVID, but throughout their organizational history as well, to make Utah a better place for all people to call home. On that note, we appreciate everyone's continued efforts to keep our communities safe in the face of COVID-19. While we hope that we will be able to host next year's Common Good Awards in person, we are grateful to our award recipients and special guests for joining us virtually today, as well as for all of you attendees at home, at your home offices, or at your office. We also owe a debt of gratitude to our sponsors today, many of whom support Envision Utah not only through this event, but through our ongoing operations. Please join me in thanking our headlining sponsors, Rocky Mountain Power and Intermountain Healthcare, our gold sponsor today, the Gardner Company, our silver sponsors, AARP Utah and the Nature Conservancy, our bronze sponsors, the Beasley Family Foundation, and our copper sponsors, Parr Brown, Hamilton Partners, Cowboy Partners, and the Utah Transit Authority. We are also so very grateful to the George S. and Dolores Dore Eccles Foundation, whose generous matching grant makes all of your contributions go further. They have sustained Envision Utah for well over 2 decades. Now it is my pleasure to hand things off to my friend and Envision Utah's CEO, Ari Bruening. Ari?
Thanks, Teresa, and thanks to everybody who's joining us today. And I want to once again thank all of our sponsors and those who fund us throughout the year. We couldn't do it without you. And on Veterans Day, I especially want to thank all those who give service to our country and sacrifice for our country, as well as our 2 honorees today who have done so much for our community in Utah. I love this event. I love the opportunity to come together to honor those who are doing great things in Utah, to hear about important issues, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today as well about issues that are important to Utah. We as a state have been the fastest growing state in the country for the last 10 years. And we like to blame all the Californians moving in, but the reality is 2/3 of our growth is our own kids. Now, growth is a good problem to have because we grow because we have a strong economy, thanks Teresa, and we have a high quality of life. In Utah, our kids stay, others want to join us. Great problem to have, but it brings challenges. Traffic, air quality, strain on our water resources, as well as housing affordability pressures. Speaking of housing affordability, in the last year, our housing prices in Utah have gone up more than 20% just in 1 year. Now, I've got a daughter who's going away to college in a year, and I am starting to think that I'm going to have to keep her room warm so that after she graduates, she can move back in with us. Now, all these pressures of growth are causing a lot of concern among Utahns. For the first time in our polling, we're seeing Utahns becoming anti-growth. So that raises the question, why don't we just stop growing? Well, the only way to slow our growth is to change those two things that cause our growth. That's our prosperous economy and our high quality of life. So we could stop supporting economic growth so our kids can't find jobs here and have to move somewhere else. We can fail to plan well and make life miserable so that people want to move somewhere else. We can fail to build enough housing so that our housing prices continue to soar. And when we try to stop growth by just not zoning for housing, that's exactly what we're doing. We're contributing to that housing shortage. And the people we price out aren't going to be the people selling their $1 million homes in California. It's our own kids. So if we can't just stop the growth, what do we do about it? Well, along the Wasatch Front, we're also facing some land constraints. We are starting to see that the land near our job centers and the valleys where the jobs are starting to disappear. And if we don't accommodate more housing in those valleys, people will have to move to other valleys. And think about what does that mean? What does that mean for those people who have to drive farther to their jobs? What does that mean for air quality, traffic, household budgets? What does it mean for our farmland? These are questions that we all need to explore together as a state. Because if we don't proactively look ahead and manage our growth will manage us, and we're not going to like the outcomes. So that's why we've been talking with some of our planning partners in state and local government about the need for a statewide growth conversation and growth vision. We had this kind of conversation in the late 1990s, and the results included more travel options, 140 miles of new passenger rail that's been built, cleaner air, more housing options, over 100 square miles of land that didn't get converted into homes and businesses, and reduced per capita water usage. We had another conversation about 7 years ago now called Your Utah, Your Future. Since that time, we've added 300,000 people to our state. We've also experienced a global pandemic that changed life in Utah, probably forever in some ways. And it's time to have another robust conversation, focused conversation on how we can establish a renewed vision together for how to grow. And this conversation can help Utahns understand the realities and causes of growth, and that the most important question isn't should we grow or how much should we grow, but how should we grow? It'll help Utahns understand that the decisions that they make in their communities have implications that extend far beyond their own neighborhoods, because traffic, air pollution, housing markets, and watersheds don't stop at municipal boundaries. So we hope you'll participate in this conversation, because we can't do it without you. At Envision Utah, we have no power to regulate or zone or appropriate tax dollars. We only have the power to convene and to engage Utahns in dialogue about key issues to find common ground. That's the power of good ideas and the power of a nonprofit, nonpartisan public-private partnership. Now, with the right intentionality and the right foresight, we can continue to grow and remain a great place to live in Utah, a place where our children can find good jobs and great housing while breathing clean air, enjoying unparalleled outdoor recreation, and traveling conveniently to their destinations. So now, before I finish, I want to take a minute to remind you of some of the resources that Envision Utah has available to help with our issues that we face as a state. So this summer, we released a guide on creating walkable centers in our communities called the Creating Communities Guide. Over 2.5 decades of our work, Utahns have consistently rated walkable centers as a key to our growth, the kind of places that they want to live. These walkable centers create a sense of community. They create gathering spaces where local businesses can prosper, and they reduce how far and how often we need to drive to get places. So this guide takes our years of experience at looking at centers, adds it to the expertise of planners and many of our partners around the state, and gives guidance for how to build those centers in our communities. Now, if you're interested in air quality, we have created an online resource that helps you know how to reduce emissions, whether you're an individual, a business, a policymaker. You can visit this site at yourairyourutah.org, and it'll give you a library of things that you can do and point you to resources to help you. Our vision for teacher excellence paints a picture for the future of education, where competitive compensation attracts great teachers to the classroom and keeps them in the classroom so that we can have great instruction for our children and ultimately better educational outcomes for all students. Now, if you have babies or toddlers in your life, you can build their brains and set them up for a lifetime of success by talking to them and engaging with them. Vroom is a free and non-commercial tool that coaches you how to do that. And finally, we've begun releasing a series of podcasts about Utah's key issues. So if you want to learn more about air quality or water, check out those podcasts on our website. So these and many more resources are available for anyone to use on our website, and they were created with the same kind of collaboration that we try to use every day. So thank you again for all of you attending today, and thank you to our sponsors and to our Common Good Award winners, Utah Refugee Connection and Workers' Compensation Fund Insurance. And thank you to those who have taken the time to speak to us today. Now, it's my privilege to introduce Governor Spencer Cox. We appreciate his commitment to our work and his vision for Utah's future. We also appreciate his support of this event and the organizations being honored today. So these remarks were recorded previously.
Hi, I'm Governor Spencer Cox. Thank you so much for joining us today as we come together to honor those who are doing truly amazing things for our community. And thank you to Envision Utah for hosting. Envision Utah is all about doing things the Utah way, asking us to set aside our political differences, finding common ground, and looking to the future to leave this place better for our children and grandchildren. I first worked with Envision Utah as Lieutenant Governor 6 years ago when we partnered up to invite Utahns to share their voice as part of Your Utah, Your Future, an unprecedented effort to create a vision for the future of our state. We heard from more than 50,000 Utahns who shared their hopes, dreams, and concerns for the future. Their input became a statewide vision for 2050, and we've been working hard to turn that vision into a reality ever since. I'm happy to report we've made some excellent progress. We've brought Tier 3 fuel to our state, which is helping to drastically reduce emissions from our cars and clean our air. We're building housing closer to transit. Since 2010, over 40% of new multifamily housing units have been built within walking distance of a rail station. We also brought together water experts from across Utah to develop a 50-year water strategy for the entire state. We've made major efforts to improve education outcomes by improving teacher compensation so we can attract more great people into the profession and keep them in the classroom. Those are just a few examples of the great things that have happened by implementing the Your Utah, Your Future vision. But we're not done. Over the last 10 years, Utah has been the fastest growing state in the nation. That's a sign that we're doing things right. We have a high quality of life and a prosperous economy, so our kids stay in the state and other people want to join us. But growth brings challenges for air quality, housing, transportation, water, and a host of other issues. Our climate is also changing. Studies are showing wildfires, drought, warmer temperatures, and reduced snowpack will be an increasingly disruptive part of our future. It's going to take collaboration and cooperation from every Utahn today to ensure that we can deal with all these challenges and keep Utah a great place to live for generations to come. And we all know things will never be the same after this pandemic. For all those reasons, it's time for us to come together again and envision our future. I'm happy to lend my support to Envision Utah's efforts to refresh the Your Utah, Your Future vision. Whether you've lived here for 6 generations or 1, it's time for us to roll up our sleeves and get to work. Utahns are builders, and I believe that when we come together, we can accomplish anything. I'm proud to call Utah my home, and I want my kids and future grandkids to be able to say the same thing. I'm confident that by working together, we can ensure we all have a bright future together.
Thank you so much, Governor Cox, for those remarks. And thank you, as always, for your support of Envision Utah and the work that we do. We are now going to move into the awards portion of today's program. And we are so thrilled to be able to give 2 Common Good Awards this year. The first to the Utah Refugee Connection and the second to WCF Insurance. Both organizations have done incredible work. And as I said at the outset, not just over the past year, but for decades here in Utah. We are so grateful to both for everything that they do. Two members of Envision Utah's executive committee, Dan Lofgren and Lou Kramer, will introduce our award recipients in turn. We also have a brief video for each winning organization, and we will give each of our winners the chance to make a few remarks. I'm excited to hear from them. Dan?
Thank you very much, Teresa. I'm excited for you all to get to know the Utah Refugee Connection, our first 2021 Common Good Award recipient. The formal mission of URC, Utah Refugee Connection, is to create meaningful connections between refugees, the community, and the public and private organizations that support refugees in developing self-sufficient and fulfilling lives, linking those who can and will help with those who need help. Over 38,000 times in 2020, a refugee or a refugee household found the help they needed in one form or another through the work of Utah Refugee Connection. Utah Refugee Connection was founded about 12 years ago when two remarkable people, Missy Larson and Lou Miller, accepted an invitation to address refugee challenges that didn't seem at the time to have a champion. But the organization has evolved and the scope of the work has broadened. As I noted earlier, there is some amazing scale to the efforts given the tiny staff at URC. I mentioned 38,000 annual refugee interactions. Some of you may be familiar with efforts like the Back to School Backpacks program that this fall sent 6,000 refugee students back to school with the supplies they needed to ensure success. Every one of those backpacks was a donation from the community, coordinated by URC, working in partnership with Granite School District, who's been a remarkable partner for URC. The Utah Refugee Connection Share House, stocked with donations from thousands of members of the community who learn of specific needs through a robust social media network, every week distributes critical care items such as diapers, cleaning and COVID kits, personal hygiene kits, food and gas support, and a host of other items needed so desperately by our refugee friends. And at the heart of all this is Amy Harmer, the executive director, who truly is the soul of what is happening and whose compassion and sincerity has proved to be contagious. Amy inspires the best in others and has the most amazing knack for building bridges. Amy, working hand in hand with organizations such as Granite School District, the Utah Department of Workforce Services, Women of the World, International Rescue Community, Catholic Community Services, and so many more, who are truly devoted to easing the challenges and the trauma of the refugee experience, has developed an extraordinary sense of what is needed and when it is needed. And in her truly guileless way, gathers the people and resources to close the gaps and pull together those who can help with those who need help. I will tell you firsthand, association with URC is just good for your soul. I've witnessed over and over good people doing good things for no other reason than their compassion and an urgency to ease the burden of others. All of that good, so many people with no reward than knowing they are doing good, is something that happens every day here in Utah. And while it's impressive to talk about scale, I mentioned 38,000 or 6,000 backpacks, even more inspiring are the person-to-person interactions that Amy fosters that really, really bring out the best in people. URC isn't a program, it's a kind of a movement. Sometimes it's backpacks for school kids. Sometimes it's helping a refugee family move. Sometimes it's holding hands, literally holding hands and helping a refugee find acutely needed mental health care. And the list goes on, and I could talk for hours about how I personally have been moved by what I have seen URC and Amy Harmer accomplish. But instead of listening to me, I invite you to enjoy this short video, just get a glimpse of the hard but truly amazing work that goes on at the Utah Refugee Connection. Our sincere thanks to Amy Harmer and the Utah Refugee Connection, and our most sincere congratulations on receiving a 2021 Common Good Award.
The goal of Utah Refugee Connection is to fill gaps in services in the local refugee communities, to support and help those programs that might need a little extra support. On the other side of that, we really focus on helping the general community have ways to, number one, learn about refugees in the community, have ways to serve, and have ways to give.
They've been helping us, our communities, when we had people need help, we're calling them, and then they prepare for what we needed, like laundry soaps, hygienes, and so on. Or when we have a need to our mosque, so the mosque love, paper towel, cleaning stuffs, they really like. So we've been delivering them to them so many years. So they've been doing wonderful jobs.
I think one of the most obvious impacts is the share house itself and the basic needs supplies that come from the share house to support refugee families. But I think the most important thing that I see come out of this is the building of community. So it's not just providing these resources for refugee families, it's connecting refugee families to their community and making us a better community overall. So as we learn from refugee families and the friendships that have been forged and the opportunities to serve and to volunteer, I think all that kind of stuff uplifts our community in general, and I think is the most important part of a partnership like this.
You guys have no idea about how they are doing, how they are helping refugees. Can you believe how many refugees are living in Utah? And thousands of them, including the new refugees come from Afghanistan. So everybody look after this Utah Refugee Connection. In West Valley, Salt Lake City, Mid Valley, everybody talk about Utah Connection every day. They are very generous people. As refugees, as me, as a refugee, is a blessing to us.
Every year we collect backpacks and school supplies, and 5 years ago I have pictures of kids that are getting these backpacks and school supplies at the event that we have in collaboration with Granite School District. And now I'm seeing them graduate from the University of Utah after having full scholarships, which is awesome.
When the school reopening, we're calling Utah Refugee Connections to get the order for the backpacks for the school, like 300, 400, 500 families. And the kids loved it to get the backpacks from the Utah Refugee Connections because they can, the refugee families, they cannot able to afford the money to buy the backpacks. So they've been really good. I like them. What they're doing is unbelievable, really.
During the year of COVID, we served over 30,000 refugees in different ways, with whether it be food kits, face masks, working with community leaders that had outbreaks in their communities. And because of the community's response to sharing items and donating to our share house, we in turn were able to help a lot of really vulnerable refugees during COVID.
I'm Governor Spencer Cox, and I want to congratulate Utah Refugee Connection for winning a 2021 Common Good Award. Thank you for helping to make our state such a welcoming place. Utah has a great history of welcoming refugees from around the world, and we are grateful for your incredible work to continue that tradition, even during a time of shortages, restrictions, and lockdowns. From face masks and hand sanitizer to laptops and leadership courses, your work creates meaningful connections between refugees and the community. With only a small team and a tight budget, you've been able to engage thousands of Utahns in taking care of our newest neighbors by providing backpacks, school supplies, baby care kits, gas money, and other household items. You've raised incredible amounts of money, coordinated thousands of donations, and facilitated over 40,000 hours of service for local refugees. Thank you for your hard work, and congratulations again on your impressive accomplishments. There's still work to be done, but we are grateful to have such an amazing organization on the front lines. Thank you and congratulations.
Wow, what an honor. I'm a big fan of what Envision Utah does, making our future look brighter in Utah. On a daily basis, I get to see the contrasting elements of heartache and hope. Many refugees have been through the unfathomable, and I'm not sure I would fare as well in their shoes. I've discovered, however, that after their basic needs are met, they become more comfortable in their new home, and they are free to become more of who they're really meant to be. Their talents and skills become a vibrant part of our communities. They give back, they start businesses, they problem solve, they take risks. They teach me not to take the basics in my own life for granted. Utah Refugee Connection has a small and committed group of people who love what they do. They educate the community and love the refugees they serve. They treat them with dignity and respect. Our partners, especially Granite School District's family and community engagement centers, have been super critical to our success. Several years ago, a family member I respect shared this quote by Michael Lewis, who's an American author and financial journalist. And he said, "Above all this, recognize that if you have had success, you have also had luck. And with luck comes obligation. You owe a debt not just to your gods, you owe a debt to the unlucky." Refugees are some of the most unlucky people I know. Intelligence, creativity, and ingenuity are universal. However, opportunities are not. Welcoming refugees to this land of opportunity is important. Helping them learn and grow initially will pay great dividends as their talents are uncovered. Their human potential is remarkable and an investment I'm grateful that so many Utahs feel compelled to help with. I'm so grateful that Utah Refugee Connection is being honored with the Envision Common Good Award, so more people can see the gift that diversity is in our community and find ways to engage meaningful in learning about, serving, and giving to our refugee community. We look forward to the future and the ways these refugees can shape what happens in our great state. So thrilled to accept this award, and thank you for the generous support that we've received from the community here in Salt Lake City. Thank you.
Hello and congratulations, Amy, and to the Utah Refugee Connection. Hi, I'm Lou Kramer of Colliers International, and I'm also an executive committee member with Envision Utah. On this memorable Veterans Day, I'm excited to announce our second 2021 Common Good Award recipient, Workers' Compensation Fund Insurance. WCF Insurance was established more than 100 years ago to help employers in Utah meet the then new national requirements to provide workplace insurance to their employees. So for the past century, WCF has had a simple vision to provide this critical insurance by always focusing on excellent customer services to its policyholders and their employees. Led by our talented friend and colleague, Ray Pickup, and his extraordinary team, in recent years, WCF has consistently gone above and beyond superb customer service by evolving with the times to expand its new and innovative ways to make Utah an even better place to live and work. I sincerely wish I had not just 2 minutes, but 2 hours to share the many amazing and innovative things that WCF is consistently doing for small businesses and Utah residents. Particularly in these pandemic years, we feel especially very grateful and pleased to recognize WCF for their extraordinary efforts and contributions to ensure the security and success of small businesses in our state.
When COVID hit a lot of local and small businesses hard, WCF saw these needs and took immediate action, such as donating $1 million to the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity to provide bridge loans to small business, by funding the Salt Lake Chamber to provide much needed small business grants across the state, by helping the University of Utah feed frontline medical workers, and the list goes on and on. But let's all see for ourselves in this short video highlighting the uncommonly good work of WFC Insurance. Congratulations to Ray Pickup, his marvelous team, and to WCF Insurance for a very, very well-deserved Common Good Award.
As a company, we've always had a very conservative management philosophy around putting away money for a rainy day. And when the pandemic hit, we knew that we were in a position to where we could help others in the community based on that conservative approach we had taken the past 25 years. So it was really, the state of Utah has been great to us. We felt like it was a great time to give back and help others that weren't as fortunate as we were.
It's been amazing for me to see just how much WCF Insurance stepped forward to help not just their consumers, but really the broader business community. And they did that specifically in a grant program. We call that the Main Street Preservation Grant Program, primarily to small businesses, rural businesses, and women and minority-owned businesses. They called and said, we'd like to contribute, we'd like to help these small businesses. And they had $500,000 that they were willing to spend, and they wanted to know how we, the Salt Lake Chamber, could work with them.
An important part of our mission at WCF Insurance is to give back to the community. And we are pleased to partner with many of the nonprofit organizations in Utah that are doing so much good.
In the early days of the pandemic, we weren't sure, and I think many nonprofits weren't sure, how are we going to keep doing the work that now is so much more needed? And when WCF Insurance showed up and said, how can we help? Here are some resources. What more can we do? The impact of that literally was thousands of people were helped with rent assistance. Thousands of people were connected to emergency food help through 211. Literally thousands of kids were reconnected to school, provided with laptops, internet assistance, and subsequently human beings connecting with kids and families to just say, how can we help you through this moment and then stay and re-engage with school?
We want to be one of the companies that institutions and people can look to in Utah to help in times of needs and to help with important causes.
This was not a one-time occurrence for them. It's not a one-off for them either. This is something that they're always doing. Whatever the need is at the time, WCF Insurance is involved and they're there to help.
Our focus as a company is really on our customers in the communities we do business in. So it's great to be part of a company that all of us on the leadership team, we serve in the community, and also the company that we're really focused on giving money out of our foundation to make the communities we do business in a better place.
Just like to say thank you to Ari Bruening, the leadership, and the board of Envision Utah for this wonderful recognition. It's a tremendous honor. Thank you.
Congratulations to WCF Insurance for winning a 2021 Common Good Award. Thank you for your incredible work to support Utah businesses and families. We are particularly grateful for the exceptional support and contributions you extended to communities and businesses throughout the state during this COVID-19 pandemic. This includes a donation of $1 million to the Utah Governor's Office of Economic Development to provide bridge loans to small businesses. For small businesses in rural Utah, a donation of $500,000 to the Salt Lake Chamber for small business grants. a $100,000 donation to the United Way of Salt Lake to support their efforts with mortgage, rent, and healthcare assistance. And for needed assistance at the Utah Food Bank, a $50,000 donation to help feed frontline medical workers, $40,000 to the University of Utah. And we recognize WCF Insurance also supported many nonprofit organizations and provided additional funding to help organizations survive through a very difficult time. Your support throughout the pandemic has been nothing short of extraordinary. Congratulations and thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Lou, for that very generous introduction, and congratulations to Amy and the Utah Refugee Connection, and thank you for the very, very important work you are doing. It is a great honor for WCF Insurance to receive Envision Utah's 2021 Common Good Award. Thank you to Ari Bruening and the board of Envision Utah for this wonderful recognition. I am humbled and pleased to accept it on behalf of our board of directors and all of the amazing, generous employees at WCF Insurance. We are fortunate to have Envision Utah in our state, a remarkable, unique organization dedicated to creating a better future for Utah. Like Envision Utah, WCF Insurance is committed to building a successful future through providing a low cost of insurance to Utah businesses, keeping Utah workers safe and on the job, implementing clean air options for our employees, providing volunteer efforts and opportunities for our employees, and assisting some of the many great charitable organizations in our state. We're so thrilled and humbled to receive this recognition. Thank you.
Congratulations, and once again, thank you to our very inspiring award recipients this year, the Utah Refugee Connection and WCF Insurance. We're moving now to the next part of today's program, where we will focus on a critical topic, especially a topic that is especially critical to us here in Utah, climate change. To kick it off, we are joined today by Seth Arens. Seth currently works as a Utah Research Integration Specialist with Western Water Assessment. In the past, Seth has worked as an environmental and research scientist for the Utah Division of Air Quality. He's studied the impacts of climate change in Arctic ecosystems, and he has a diverse background in science, including in researching in snow hydrology and atmospheric science. We wanted to open up this important topic today with some hard-hitting data from a climate expert before we move into our conversation with Representative Curtis. And I imagine that that's exactly what Seth is going to give us. So with that, I will turn the time over to Seth, and I thank him in advance for being with us here today.
Thank you for the introduction, Teresa. It's my honor to talk about climate change preceding Representative Curtis today. So today we're going to talk about Utah's climate future. But before we do that, first I want to very briefly talk about some changes that we've seen already in Utah in terms of temperature. Over the past, since 1895, Utah has warmed 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This figure here shows average annual temperature change since 1895 averaged across the state. And while there's great variability between years, you can see a steady increase in temperature, especially since about 1980. Now, to put these numbers in context, the United States as a whole has warmed less than Utah, about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit since 1895. And there's actually other parts of Utah, specifically in eastern and southern Utah, that have warmed by 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. A point I want to make here is that Utah is a hotspot of warming already observed in the United States. Utah is warming faster than the globe is and faster than the United States. So unfortunately, it's still going to get hotter. This figure here shows projections of average annual temperature across the state of Utah. The blue line in blue shading represents a moderate emissions scenario. The red line in red shading represents a high emissions scenario, or RCP 8.5. The shading here represents the variability between 20 climate models, and the line represents the mean of those 20 climate models. So by mid-century, it's going to get quite a bit warmer in Utah. By 2065, a moderate emission scenario projects about a 4.5-degree temperature increase. Under the high emission scenario, that temperature increase is almost 7 degrees. By the end of the century, 2090, under a moderate emission scenario, temperatures increases start to slow under that moderate emission scenario, with warming of about 7 degrees Fahrenheit. However, under the high emission scenario, warming will be as high as 10 degrees Fahrenheit statewide. And now to put that in context, we all have an idea of what the difference between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit is, but average annual temperatures are a little harder to conceptualize. So to put this in context, currently the average annual temperature of Phoenix is 10 degrees hotter than Salt Lake City, Utah. So by the end of the century, Salt Lake City, Utah, under a high emissions scenario, will see temperatures that are comparable to present day Phoenix. So precipitation is likely to increase in the future. Maybe. Well, and that maybe is because unlike projections of future temperature, not all climate models agree that precipitation will increase in Utah. About 80% of models project an increase in temperature or in precipitation in Utah, 20% project a decrease. And of those climate models that project an increase in precipitation, only about 20% of those are statistically significant. So while we have climate model information about future precipitation, it's much less certain than climate model projections of temperature. So if you take the mean of these 20 climate models represented in this figure, by 2065, under a moderate emission scenario, there's a projected 6% increase in precipitation. Under the high emission scenario, that's about 8%. By the end of the century, 2090, under a moderate emission scenario, there's likely to be an 8% increase in precipitation, and under a high emission scenario, nearly 11% increase. I do want to stress that while these numbers are kind of positive when thinking about living in an arid state like Utah, there is a lot of variability in model projections. And just because the mean of these models is, say, suggesting an 11% increase in precipitation, it doesn't mean that those models that project less of a precipitation increase are any less likely to happen. What we are certain about with climate models is regardless of what precipitation does, temperatures will increase. And that means it's going to snow less here in Utah. This figure shows snow water equivalent. So snow water equivalent is the amount of snow held in snow on April 1st. And this shows projections of that snow water equivalent, how much that will decrease at 3 time points coming up. By 2040, there's projected to be a 40% decrease in snow in Utah. This is across all mountain areas in Utah. By the end of the century, 2090, that decrease is even higher. Under a moderate emission scenario, there's going to be about a 60% decrease in snow water equivalent. And under a high emission scenario, that goes to 85%. However, there are some locations in Utah where that looks even bleaker. In Box Elder, Graham, Juab, Millard, and Tooele counties, there's projected to be over a 90% decrease in snow water equivalent by 2090 under a high emission scenario. So it's very likely going to rain more. We'll see more precipitation, but it's actually going to be drier. At first glance, that doesn't really make sense. Well, what's going on here is that higher temperatures, which we're certain about through climate models, will drive a large increase in evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is the amount of water lost to the atmosphere through evaporation of water from soil and through the transpiration of water by plants. These are trees, grasses. This increase in evapotranspiration is more than enough to offset the modest increase in precipitation. Also adding to these drier conditions are that there's going to be less snow, especially at lower elevations. That snow will begin to fall later in the season and melt off earlier. This means that ecosystems are going to be exposed to drying for more of the year. There's going to be a shorter period of time with snow on the ground. And I want to stress that higher temperatures alone will cause drier conditions and more drought. So I really want to focus on this point for a minute, this concept that higher temperatures alone cause drying. And I want to put this in perspective of a very simplified water budget for a river in Utah. So this is a simplified water budget on a current average year for the Upper Virgin River. This is a river basin in southwestern Utah. On a normal year, the Virgin sees about 30 inches of precipitation. 18 inches or 60% of that precipitation is lost to the atmosphere through evapotranspiration. This is what we'd expect to see. This leaves about 12 inches left for runoff. So this is the amount of water, the surface water in the Virgin River throughout the year. And this constitutes what we consider a normal runoff year. Now let's imagine this scenario in the future. So here's a projection of that simplified water budget for the year 2065. It rains a little bit more. There's an 8% increase in precipitation. This is good for water availability. Now, evapotranspiration also increases by about 10%. This means more water is being lost to the atmosphere. So the amount of runoff amount of water left in the system for runoff and surface water is less than 10 inches. And if we remember, the normal runoff in 2021 was from 12 inches of water. So this means runoff is only going to be about 81% of normal. And we can think of this as kind of a new normal for runoff, that in the future, an average year may only yield about 80% of the water that we saw in the Virgin River in 2021. Now, I'd like to put this into context with total water resources in Utah. So by 2090, considering projections of climate change, the amount of surface water available, so this is water in rivers and streams, under a high emission scenario is projected to decrease by 800,000 acre feet. Now, to put that number into context, 800,000 acre feet represents 34% of the total amount of surface water used by Utahns in 2015. So I want to talk just a little bit about how climate change will affect climate hazards and natural disasters. Drought will increase, its frequency, severity, and extent of drought will increase. Average years of the past will become drought years in the future. So even in the future with higher temperatures, when we get an average amount of precipitation, what's considered average today will be a drought year in the future. Extreme heat waves will be more frequent and hotter. Wildfire will increase. There'll be more fires and there'll be a greater chance of very large fires. These drier conditions will lead to a longer fire season. And this is largely due to the fact that there will be less snow. There's a shorter period of time where the landscapes will be covered in snow. That means the landscapes will be able to burn for a longer period of time. We'll see air quality impacts, even when there aren't fires in Utah, much as we saw in the summer of 2021. There'll be an increased risk of extreme rainfall and flooding. And I also want to make the point that these hazards do not exist in isolation. Hazards and climate change interact together and often build on each other so that increases in one hazard can cause increases in another hazard. For example, higher temperatures will cause more drought. More drought causes an increased risk to wildfire, which causes an increased risk of flash floods, especially from burn scars left by these fires. Now, finally, I want to leave you with just a very brief synopsis of how some of these changes in climate will impact Utah. When one thinks about climate change in Utah and in much of the West, we think about water supply. Climate change will likely reduce the amount of water available for use in Utah, and there will also be some water quality issues, potentially with increased runoff coming from wildfire burns, and also water quality impacts from algal blooms as temperatures increase. This change to water supply will affect both municipal water and agricultural water uses. The ski industry and tourism will likely be impacted by climate change. As temperatures warm, there will be less snow, especially at low elevations. Low elevation ski areas will be most vulnerable to these changes in climate. Also, air quality impacts. If wildfires continue to burn as they did in this previous summer, some of the air quality impacts may impact tourism, as air quality was poor for much of the state, much of this summer. Quality of life will change. Hotter temperatures are more difficult to deal with in the summer and a hazard to human health. Also, poor air quality will affect both health and quality of life during summer. When thinking about climate change here in Utah, it's also important to think about impacts that economic growth and climate change have together. Climate change will impact water supply. So as the economy in Utah grows, population grows, we have to understand how to supply water for this population. As the population grows, transportation needs to be considered, and how will that interact with air quality? The state of Utah needs to have its infrastructure ready for these changes to climate. We need to build a more resilient infrastructure in Utah. This means roads, bridges, culverts, ways that we convey water. Another important impact, especially here in northern Utah, is the Great Salt Lake. The Great Salt Lake reached an all-time low elevation in August, since records have been kept starting in 1870. This will have impacts potentially to air quality, wildlife, bird migration, and the brine shrimp industry. It's also extremely important when thinking about climate change and the impacts of that climate to consider climate justice. Climate change often disproportionately affects low-income, Latino, and Native American communities. Thank you.
Wow, Seth, thank you very much for that informative and, may I say, sobering presentation. That information really sets the stage for us and our need to talk about solutions for our state. So I'm therefore excited to turn to a conversation on climate stewardship between our chair, Doug Wright, and our special guest, Representative John Curtis. Many of us had the great fortune of getting to know Representative Curtis when he had a different title, the title of Mayor Curtis. He was a transformative mayor of Provo for the better part of a decade. But since 2017, he's represented Utah's 3rd Congressional District, where he has worked on important legislation around public lands, human trafficking, small business support, and many other important issues. He is also the founder and inaugural chairman of the Conservative Climate Caucus. Due to some scheduling conflicts, which we'll forgive in this case because it's the Climate Change Conference in Scotland, this conversation was recorded previously. We would like to thank those of you who have already submitted questions in advance. Doug tried to make sure that those questions were incorporated into the discussion. So with that, I am pleased to introduce Representative John Curtis and Doug Wright.
Congressman Curtis, it's a delight to have you with us at Envision Utah for our Common Goods Awards. And you know, what an opportunity to sit down and chat with you. Thank you for making the time available.
Oh, Doug, I'm just a huge fan of yourself and the organization, and really pleased to be part of this and help them celebrate this special occasion.
This is such a special thing when we honor organizations, groups that have done so much for our community, and this time, Workers' Compensation Fund and the Utah Refugee Connection. It is so important to recognize people, especially in the last several years when it's been so tough.
You know, I feel like one of the problems with this whole subject and everything that we're talking about is we rarely stop and celebrate achievement and success. Most often we're saying, why can't you do more? Why aren't you doing more? And I just think it's a really important thing to slow down and celebrate success. And,
isn't that true?
The contributions that people are making.
Yeah, and so many people are. It's amazing the outreach that we have seen and the great organizations that really have gone the extra mile. I think it says a lot about our country. It says a lot about our Utahns.
It does. And I'll go so far as to say, I don't think Congress could have legislated as much progress as business has made. I think business is way out ahead of Congress on this and doing remarkable things.
We have a particular thing that we're looking at this year during the Common Good Awards, and we wanted to talk about climate change. And you immediately came to the forefront on that when we were looking for people who could address that because of actions that you have taken back in Washington, D.C. But let's talk a little bit about climate change and how serious it is in your view. We've ignored it, especially within, honestly, candidly, the Republican Party Many would say for far too long. Where are you on it right now? And what has motivated you when you were a candidate, when you were the mayor of Provo, candidate, of course, for Congress, and now that you're sitting in the seat in Washington? How big a deal is this for you?
It's a big deal, but I don't mind saying that it's been a journey for me. And you alluded to being mayor of Provo. It felt easy as a mayor of Provo because it was all about clean air. And we could all agree that dirty air was bad. And then I got mixed up in DC politics, and all of a sudden it becomes complicated, right? Can you really embrace the Green New Deal, right? Can you really embrace some of these ideas that seem quite radical? I like to say they want to take the head off to fix the headache. And I think, to be honest, that scares a lot of conservatives away from the conversation. And as a result, because conservatives don't engage, we're branded as not caring and somehow denying the science. And my experience is that's just not true. Conservatives and Utahns care deeply. I like to tease Utahns that they're the best environmentalists I know. They just don't like to be called environmentalists.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
It's like the term progressives.
Yeah.
You look at how progressive our state has been over the years on women's suffrage. I mean, you name it.
But don't call me a progressive.
But don't call me a progressive. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Early on, when I remember, and President Obama said that this had been an evolutionary path for him. Several things, and I think many of us could use that term. If it wasn't a full tilt embrace, it was we need to look serious at this. And it was an evolutionary path for many of us. As you look at the path now, from where you sit, and honestly with the power that you now have as a sitting United States congressman, what is the vision? What is the long-term outlook? Where do you want us to be at point X?
Well, I think that's a really good question because I think we're off track as a country. And what I mean by that is we're caught in extremisms. On the one hand, it's extreme ideas, it's almost craziness. On the other hand, it's denial. And in reality, neither of those work. And unless we start coming together with some rational thought of just thoughtful people. And for me, it centers on some very simple questions. Is less pollution better than more pollution, right? Is less plastic in the ocean better than more plastic in the ocean? Is less carbon better than more carbon? And of course, the answer is yes. And I think we need to just start engaging on a that really simple level of, yeah, we can agree that we need to be making progress. We can put some of this divisiveness aside for just a little bit and just talk about, like, how do we improve this beautiful planet that we have? I'm convinced that deeply implanted in all of us is just this God-given, responsibility to be good stewards. And how do we appeal to that instead of kind of the craziness, if that makes sense? I think that's the secret.
Quite a while ago, before this really did maybe burn to the front burner for almost everybody now. But I remember I talked with a founding member of Greenpeace, who, by the way, is persona non grata right now with Greenpeace for a lot of different reasons. But I remember he told me, he said, if climate change is real, and he said, and I believe it is, that we do need to take care of that for all of the kind of, oh my goodness, things. But he said, even if it isn't real, which it is, he said, why wouldn't we want it to be better? You use the term stewards. And he said, why would we want to foul our nests? Wouldn't we want this earth to be as nice as possible?
So true. And I think my aha moment was that as I dug into this, I don't need to abandon my conservative ideals in order to do this. I think that's the fear, is that I'll be asked to abandon my conservative credentials, and you don't have to do that. There are multitude of ideas out there that are very much in harmony with Utah, with conservative values, that do amazing things for this earth and the environment that we can get behind and support. And you just got to dig in and be willing to be open-minded about those ideas.
Theodore Roosevelt, who many point to as the first really highly elected progressive on especially environmental issues.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, in several of the books that I've read on him, taking that trip back, realizing President McKinley was dead, he was going to be the next president, and he was just watching the landscape of the country. And as he go through some of the mining and the timbering areas, as he was going back to Washington, he just said, this just isn't right. We have to do something about this. And that's a long time ago. That was a lot of vision from the party which you belong to.
It is, and you can go down that road even further. And a lot of Republicans kind of regret this, but it was Richard Nixon, Republican, who did the EPA. And Republicans have been involved in clean water and clean air, and we've been very instrumental. And I think it's just kind of late that we've not wanted to identify it, right, as environmentalists. But it goes deep into our past, and I think it's a past that we should claim and build on.
Mitt Romney, when he was running for the presidency, and this is already a decade ago, I can't believe it, but he was one of the first major Republicans to come out and say, I not only believe in climate change, I believe that humans play a role in it. And boy, did he take the heat. Have you taken heat?
So I have the good fortune of having to follow many people like Senator Romney and others who've been out in front of me taking arrows for this. I think whether it's my timing or just exactly, maybe it's the way I talk about it or a combination of both, I actually feel great support in my efforts. And that's been very rewarding. The number of House Republicans who have now joined our caucus, and part of the tenet for that caucus is the climate's changing and Matt's had some influence over it. I have a third of all members of Congress that have signed on to that, of Republican members. And so I think timing has been really good for me, and I feel just a tremendous amount of support.
I want to talk about the caucus that you have been so instrumental in putting together. But before we do, was there an epiphanal moment for you when it came, you mentioned the evolutionary path or the trail that you've been on, leading you to where you are today and where many of us are today. For Richard Nixon, I think when some of the rivers in America, you could throw a match on it and it would burn.
Yeah.
That was an epiphanal moment for a lot of people in the formation of the EPA and a lot of things that happened back in the early 1970s. What was it for you?
Well, it goes back a long time. It goes back to a Boy Scout. And I had a scoutmaster who he was a mountain man and he loved to take us on hikes. And as a 13-year-old, he took us up to the top of Kings Peak. And I remember as a 13-year-old looking out over this, as far as the eye could see, nature without any influence from man. And just having this feeling burn in my soul that is beautiful and that needs to be preserved and protected. And I didn't realize it at the moment, but I think I look back on those experiences as a scout and quite frankly, learning the basics of environmentalism. Leave your campground better than you found it, right? All we have to do is just follow that one tenet of scouting, and we're in good shape. And I actually think, Doug, that's for me where it started. And my father loved the outdoors. He loved to take me outdoors and enjoy the beautiful outdoors and point out, the beauty of nature. And I missed that about him. And that was, I think, part of what was planted deep in my soul.
Isn't that a wonderful thing, especially here in Utah? You can find it in Colorado and, Arizona and other places, certainly Nevada and Wyoming and Idaho. But when you are in a valley or you are in a place, I think of the Rush Valley here in Utah. And if you're in a particular place, I remember one time when I was quite young, I went, there isn't a single light unless there was a car on some old back road somewhere. And I'll drive through even in the daytime and you'll get a view out there, the Sheeprock Mountains and so on. And you'll go, this is the way my great-great-grandfather would have seen this valley.
I have to tell you, I took a group from Washington, D.C. to Moab.
Yeah.
And we took them out at night underneath an arch and watched the sunset and the sky and the stars come out. And this was a group of people who had never seen stars.
Yeah.
Isn't that just astounding to you? And it was such a cool thing for me to show them that part of nature that they just never see because of the light pollution back east.
Right. Let's talk about the caucus itself. How and why was this put together?
So it started with a fun little experiment. My team wanted to get Republicans talking about the climate. So we said, let's invite some Republicans out to Utah to talk about climate.
Yeah.
And my team said, if you get 5 or 6 out here, it'll be a wild success. This was last February. 24 members of Congress came to Utah to talk about climate. Some of them said, if people find out that I was there, I won't go. So we didn't make it a press event. That's how tenuous right, this was.
That's
and that they would be embarrassed to be there. And so we didn't tell the press about it, but it was a big deal that 24 Republican members of Congress came to Utah. 6 of them were what we call ranking members. And if people are not familiar with that, that's the most powerful Republican on committees. And these happen to be the committees of jurisdiction over anything, whether it was agriculture or energy and all the relevant committees. They came to Utah. and were very excited and wanted more. So we went away from that and said, we've got to find a way to bring Republicans together, give them a voice on this issue, help educate them on this issue. And so the caucus was born from that trip. And we didn't even dream that we would ever have a third of the members join it. And most of those came to us. We didn't even recruit them. They came and said, we want to be part of this.
With those numbers now, is that tending to give, the term is cover, is it giving cover for those who might in their heart, we would call them what, closet climate change believers? Does it give them cover to maybe open the door?
It certainly, I think, intrigues them. And the names in the caucus are really important names. These are not just your average members of Congress. These are leaders in the Republican Party in Washington, D.C., and that gives so much credibility to the effort. And it does. Now, as I meet with people and say, hey, would you think about being part of this? They have to stop and think, wow, you're kidding. These people are also part of it. And it's a momentum that's going in the right direction.
When you run into a non-believer, and there are some out there, no doubt
It happens
about
a lot.
on everything, but you don't want to beat them over the head. That never gives a good win. It might give you a temporary win, but never a good long-term win. When you're trying to gently, kindly acknowledge, yes, I understand we have differing points of view, but have you considered this? What do you talk about?
I've tried different approaches. Some are successful and some are not. Some people are they're just so afraid of being pulled into the extremism that's keeping them out. And I try to help them see, look, there's a path forward here that's not extremism. It's actually right in harmony, right, with your beliefs. A lot of them really relate well to, look, I want to be a better steward. Okay, so set the litmus test questions aside, set all of that aside. Yeah, and by the way, as a member of Congress, you bear a tremendous responsibility. I don't want to be the one that has to look in the mirror 20, 30 years from now and say, I missed it on this one. This would be a big one to miss.
Is there a point where it's too late?
So I think this is really important because I don't think we follow the science on this. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Some people will stand up and say the plan's going to blow up in 7 years because they want to scare people into action. It's a natural thing that we do. And I think that's a mistake. I don't think fear motivates us very well. I think it's better to say, okay, here's the science. Look, the Earth is warming, and that's not good. And here's what's going to happen in 5 years. Here's what's going to happen in 10 years. Here's what's going to happen in 20 years. Here's what's going to happen in 30 years if we don't change our behavior. Okay, I can see that's not good. I'm willing to start changing my behavior. And I just think that's far more motivating than the gloom and doom that comes across with it. So in my opinion, no, it's not too late. The further we go down the road, the worse the consequences are that we're going to have to come to terms with, the more expensive the consequences are, the heavier the impact it is on the next generation and the next generation. And we shouldn't be shy about that. But I also think it's important to stick with the science on it.
When it comes to the caucus, are there milestones, are there specific goals and timeframes set up by the caucus?
Well, mission number one is we need to educate our members. Mission number two is we need to go on the offensive talking about the climate and put our ideas out there. I wouldn't say that there's a time frame. Right now, we're far ahead of where anybody expected with our 70 members. To me, I'm not going to be quite content until I have half the members. We're a third now and half, and then I want 3/4, and then I want them all. Right? I want every Republican comfortable talking about this. Now, I think it's important to understand that there is a parallel effort going on, and there's a specific climate task force that Kevin McCarthy has put together. Their role is to put together a legislative package that we will be supporting. And that's about a 6-month timeline when you'll see the meat and bones of that package and what we'll be advocating for. For far too long, Republicans have just told people what we don't like. And this will allow us to actually say, look, here's our specific proposals of what we're supporting. And then the caucus's role is to get members educated on these specific proposals, comfortable talking about them, and the things that they're willing to support.
Something is afoot right now already in this conversation that we've had. Water has come up, a lot. And, the argument that we've already alluded to is, boy, when it comes to water, air, climate change, everything, it's really hard to they overlap considerably. Right now, there's an effort afoot. The compact that was put together back in the 1920s on the Colorado River and the allocation of the water for the lower states and the upper states. And we've all looked back at that now, and it was a rather interesting and necessary event, all the growth that was going on in California especially, but also in Arizona. And now you look at the growth that's happening in Utah and in Nevada and upstream from there, Colorado certainly. And now there's, in light of that commission and compact that was put together in the 1920s, when it was quite an optimistic view. It was a high water year, let's put it that way, a high water year when so many of these numbers came up. As you look at the re-divvying up or the re-examination of, and certain things are absolutely guaranteed, but what do you hope of this revisiting with the Commission on the Colorado Water?
Well, if anybody doesn't fully understand the magnitude of this, they need to come down to Lake Powell. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And my family likes to spend time down there. We're 150 feet below the high water mark, 150 feet. And if you have any sense of the magnitude of Lake Powell, we're 50 feet down just this year. That cannot be sustained. And I think to answer your question, the hope has to be come out of this is not necessarily do we divvy up this water, but how do we get by on substantially less water? And what do we need to do and wake up and start realizing? And one of those things is we can't just keep growing. We can't just keep expanding. As a mayor, it really was astounding to me to watch my colleagues. Our whole goal was to grow your city, right? To expand your city. And I know darn well some of them don't have the water to expand, and they're not asking questions. They're just expanding. And there are water rights with more priority over other water rights, right?
That's right.
And when the day comes and the city says, we can no longer supply water to you, that's not going to be a good day. And as Utahns, and first of all, let's give a shout out to Utahns this summer. I think they did a fabulous job of responding to the call to conserve water. In my neighborhood, and probably most neighborhoods, if you didn't have a couple of dry spots on your lawn,
exactly,
you were embarrassed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was almost a little badge of honor to have a couple of dry spots.
That's right. Yeah, yellow was the new green.
My wife came out to me and said, our lawn's a little too green.
Yeah.
And so I think Utahns can respond, and we need to continue to respond. And listen, we've got to rethink the way we do yards. We've got to rethink the way that we do a lot of things, because we've got to get used to a future with less water.
Edward Abbey said that growth for growth's sake is the philosophy of a cancer cell. But growth is inevitable, and managing the growth. And, do you have a vision for that? Because most of our growth, as you well know, is homegrown. It's our kids.
Yeah, so the stat, I think, is close to 60 or 70% of the growth is coming from our own kids. And we do want our kids to stay here. And that's why I think we've got to change habits a little bit in the way that we put our yards together, the way that we build our homes. All of this, I think, can be rethought. And we don't need as much water as we're using. And unless we figure it out, we're not going to be able to house our kids here in Utah.
Right. Some people, look at the state of Utah and they ask, things are already changing. Brad Wilson so succinctly said that during our Envision Utah breakfast last spring. And he said, is there climate change? I've lived in Utah my whole life. I look around me, of course there's climate. Things are changing. I've noticed it from when I was a little boy, and I have too. I'm here a little longer than Brad Wilson, but I've noticed that too. And many of our water experts are saying, we're really seeing a change in patterns. And do we need to not only prepare and try to change the path we're on, the trajectory, but do we need to prepare for the changes that are going to happen in that process?
Absolutely, and it's a great point that you make. And this is the problem that we have on that point. I think to stereotype those on the right, they don't want to go down that path because they have to acknowledge climate change. To those on the left, they don't want to go down that path because it feels like, oh, it's okay if our climate's changing. We can adapt to it. And so I think both sides are actually fighting this. But the reality of it is, if we stopped all greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, worldwide, we're still on a trajectory of warming, and we have to prepare for rising sea levels. We have to prepare for droughts. We have to prepare for farming land that's no longer productive. And it's a huge mistake. The sooner we start on that adaptation part, the smaller the burden will be. So you're absolutely right, and I hope people can stop and spend part of our time not just on mitigating the problem and stopping the problem, but preparing for a changing world.
Congressman, what do you see as the most acute issue on the things that are on? We can put, you can put the brakes on the train, but it's a mile long and it takes miles to stop. What are the acute things that you're most concerned about of the effect, even if we start doing some dramatic things to change?
Well, as a Utahn, this year we could hardly see our mountains because of the forest fires, and we were spared a little bit here in Utah, but that's temporary. We all know that. We're going to see our forest burn, and that's huge. We're in the state's longest drought period, most serious drought of recorded history. That should concern all of us, and we should be very concerned about that. And then, of course, our tourism based on skiing and things like that. All of those are just kind of shouting at us, and it's not hard to see major breakdowns in our quality of life and the things that we enjoy here in the state if we don't turn the corner and start adapting to a changing world.
I was skiing in Sun Valley last winter with my kids, and water, the sprinkling systems everywhere.
Yeah.
And I talked with several of the quote unquote old timers up there, and they said, if we didn't have these systems now and couldn't make snow, we'd be half the resort that we once were.
Yeah, and you and I grew up without snowmaking machines.
That's right.
And I can't imagine some of the winters that we've had without those machines. Now what's going to happen the year we say to those ski resorts, oh, there's not enough water now to pump through those machines.
That's right.
That's going to be a very serious thing.
When you were the mayor of Provo, a huge issue for you, and boy, every poll in the state of Utah has this right up there, Republicans and Democrats. It's in the top 3, 5, and that's the air quality. Water is kind of another deal. But when you worked with Envision Utah, when you were the Provo mayor, and on the air quality, that's such a huge issue. Can you separate air quality and climate change? Are they indivisible?
So I'll tell you, one of the hardest things for me was transitioning from mayor, where we knew clean air was a problem for people and we knew what to do about it, to going back to Washington, D.C., where in reality nobody cared about clean air. It's funny as that sounds. I never have a conversation in D.C. about clean air. It's always carbon. Yeah. It's always climate change. And so this is something that's disjointed, but if you understand them, they're obviously very closely connected. And I think talking about clean air is a great way to help Utahns feel more comfortable with the changing climate and connecting the two and helping understand what we put out into the air does have consequences. And I think this is a great place to talk to people who feel like, well, yeah, the climate's changing, but man has not influenced it. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Let's look at the air in Utah, right? And it's
that's right.
So it's easier to see that parallel. Wait a minute, man can influence the air that we breathe and our overall environment. So they're connected, but I must tell you, there's a big gap between Provo clean air and DC climate change.
Yeah, you've already alluded to this, the difference of sitting in the Provo mayoral chair, or working here locally and then being back in Washington, D.C. Back there, it's all about carbon impact, carbon footprint. We hear a lot. What do you hope with the coalition you put together, the caucus that you have put together, and with the changing attitudes, even among some that might have been a little harder to bend toward the admission of even climate change, much less human involvement. What are some of the wins that you're looking for?
Yeah. I'll tell you the single biggest win is thoughtful people talking about this. We've been off in extremisms, we've been off in platitudes, right? We've been off in denial, we've been off in extremism. And the big win to me is thoughtful people on the right, on the left, coming together and talking about practical solutions that will make a difference, that we can look back and look at our kids and our grandkids in the eye and say, you bet, we started to make a difference. And to me, that's just missing. I think we're off track on a national basis on this conversation, and we're not having this thoughtful dialogue. And it's got to come together as a thoughtful dialogue. You've seen what happens anytime one party tries to go it alone.
Oh.
It's temporary. It's then attacked. So the Affordable Care Act's a good example. Tax reform is another good example where one party rammed it through, and then it's forever attacked.
Well, look at our monuments right now.
Yeah.
They're being called yo-yo monuments.
Yeah, that's what happens when one party gets their way without the other party engaging. And that's why what we're doing, getting Republicans engaged, is so critical right now.
Do you see a change? This is a little off the immediate topic, but I've given a speech occasionally about how the parties, they'd beat each other up, but they'd come together and they'd make things happen. You know, whether it was Social Security or the Civil Rights Act. I mean, some of these big monumental things that faced our country. Yeah, there was a lot of bloviating that went on and a lot of, backroom dealing, but ultimately, they really came together, and not just one or two votes. I mean, it was, in many cases, the majority of the Democratic caucus, the majority of the Republicans, and they would come together and make some of these monumental things in our country happen.
Well, let me first acknowledge that some of that still happens, not as much as we need. And I'll just point to the early COVID relief bills, right, where in an emergency we came together, and I was really proud to be part of that. But there's a couple of things driving this worse than before, and that is the kind of the, I hate to label them, but the cable networks and social media, I think are rewarding the wrong behavior. And those who are standing up on the table and beating their chest get all the attention. They're in the news. Those who are working together to try to pass bills, they're lost in this social media world and the cable network world. And I think that's driving this even further apart than what most people imagine.
It really is where everybody with every good idea, hairball idea, you name it, you can find a corner to go to now where you'll be reinforced.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and that's difficult. If I could ask you to put on your local cap, and I'll call you former mayor of Provo, John Curtis, what would you tell the fine people of Provo, Utah?
First of all,
right now,
I really miss being mayor.
You like that job, I know.
I love that job, and I love the people of Provo. We had such a good experience, and I felt so much support from them. And I would tell them, first of all, that I miss that role. I miss being part of their lives. And two is it's harder to see the way that I'm working for them now, but I want them to know that I still have, that's still that same John Curtis that fought for him in the city, that's back there in a far more complicated world, trying to navigate that, trying to do what's best, not just for Provo, but for the district and for the state. And that it's a very complicated thing. And some days I wake up myself and say, holy cow.
Yeah. What'd you get yourself into?
What did I get myself into?
What would you tell them about climate change and air quality and water?
We need them. We need them engaged, right?
Because a lot of people go, what the heck can I do?
Yeah, so this is I think the biggest misunderstanding. We're all waiting for DC to fix this. And clearly there's a role for DC, but this starts with every man, woman, and child being more careful. I love to give this example, okay? Just try walking to church in Utah, okay? And you'll have 3 or 4 well-meaning people stop and ask you if you want to ride 3 blocks.
That's true.
Right, and until we change our paradigm of personal responsibility for this problem, how in the world can we expect Washington to make all these changes when we won't do the small, simple things in our lives? And so we need, my message is, look, we need everything you do matters. If you save 1 vehicle trip per week, that doesn't sound like a big deal. But what if the 500,000 people in Utah County saved 1 vehicle trip per week? That's 500,000 vehicle trips per week.
That's right.
And these things add up. And unless we're doing that, making those types of commitments, it's really hard to look to somebody else and say, go fix this.
Right. I'll wrap myself out. We lived a block and a half from not the ward we're in now, but when our kids were growing up, our previous church. And one Sunday, I realized that of our 5-member family, we had 4 cars there.
Yeah,
4.
And
cars.
you're not unusual. This Curtis family's been there too, right? I'm as guilty as anybody.
Yeah.
The block and a half away.
I know it really is nuts. It truly is. And you're right. If you're walking somewhere, you'll have so many people just go, "Can I give you a ride?" Like, what's wrong with this guy? Maybe you could talk a little bit. Envision Utah likes to look at the future. That's our mandate, how we matter grows. I mean, all of those things that we've championed now for almost a quarter of a century. As you look at, I've asked you a million things of what you're going to do and so on. What would you like to see, and what would you like to see Envision Utah champion and do?
Well, first of all, shout out to Envision Utah. Going back to my days as mayor, I know what an important role they can play. I would just say off the top of my head to answer your question, one of their skill sets is bringing us together to form a voice, right? And helping us actually realize what our voice is. They did this in Provo as we worked on our Provo Cleaner Toolkit.
Right.
And that's really powerful. So I hope they'll feel that full burden on their shoulders and keep that mantle going. And B, I hope people will be receptive when they hear the knock on the door. Hey, this is Envision Utah. Yeah, this is a really powerful organization that will help us put our combined voice together and take Utah where we want it to go. Too often we let this ship just steer itself, and that's Envision Utah allows us to actually be steering the ship in the direction that we want it to be going.
Congressman, it's been a real honor to have you with us today, especially as we honor during our Common Good Awards these two great organizations that we've already talked about and acknowledge them. And I can't thank you enough for being part of it, for your support of Envision Utah and our friendship over the years. And I know so many people are going to be so disappointed. I haven't worked Eureka into this comment anywhere. Have you noticed that?
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it. We've already talked off the air about getting the ride to light you up Eureka.
One of my
back, right?
favorite things. Yeah.
John, thanks so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, what a great conversation. In closing, I've just got a few thank yous and a call to action, of course. So first of all, thank you to you. Thanks for joining us virtually and for making this event a success and a safe success. Thanks to our sponsors for helping to make this event possible. And thank you to our amazing award recipients, the Utah Refugee Connection and WCF Insurance, for the admirable work that you do that touches the lives of so many. Thanks to our special guests, Seth Arens and Representative John Curtis, for a very stimulating setup and conversation. And I'm going off script here, but I also want to thank Ari and his amazing team at Envision Utah. They really are incredible. This event has been lovely, and I am just so proud to be affiliated with this organization and their accomplishments. They accomplished a lot in 2021. But they don't accomplish anything alone. None of us do. Envision Utah really relies on collaboration and engagement from people like you. We strive to have the difficult conversations and to find solutions to our biggest challenges to create a bright future. And we need your support. We need your financial support. So this event isn't a huge fundraiser. In fact, many of you bought a $30 ticket to attend this lunch, and it came with a $25 DoorDash gift code. So we do want to use it to build our brand, to honor our award recipients, but we certainly would also ask for your support and invite you to donate to Envision Utah. We make it really easy for you. Just go online, envisionutah.org/donate. You'll feel great for supporting the wonderful work of this organization. This nonprofit exists for Utah's future generations, for our kids, for our grandkids. And we are lucky to have an organization like this. Many regions do not have an Envision Utah. They don't have an organization that is really dedicated to the future, that runs the type of process that they do. So I thank you in advance for your contributions, for your sponsorships, and really for whatever you can donate today, as it will now enable this organization to continue working hard for all Utahns and all aspiring Utahns and all future Utahns. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for supporting Envision Utah's work, and congratulations to our Common Good Award winners. We look forward to being with you again next year, and let's all keep our fingers crossed that it's in person. Thanks, everyone.